Here's a handy table for figuring out subnet mask, cidr prefix, total IPs, and usable IPs in our networks. If you look at the table, you can see some patterns. Let's start with the cidr prefix column. We start at 32, and then we subtract 1 as we go down. 32 minus 1 is 31. 31 minus 1 is 30. 30 minus 1 is 29, and so on. Total IPs, we can look at this a couple of ways. We double the number before it to get the next number. Double 1 is 2. Double 2 is 4. Double 4 is 8. Double 8 is 16, and so on. Or if you prefer exponents, starting with 2, 2 to the first power is 2. 2 to the second power, or 2 squared, is 4. 2 cubed is 8. 2 to the fourth power is 16. 2 to the fifth power is 32. 2 to the sixth power is 64, and so on. To get usable IPs, we subtract from total IPs. For the first row, the total IPs and the usable IPs are 1. And then we subtract 2 every time. 2 minus 2 equals 0. 4 minus 2 equals 2. 8 minus 2 equals 6. 16 minus 2 equals 14. 32 minus 2 equals 30, and so on. Next, for our subnet mask, we're going to be subtracting total IPs. We start with 4 octets of 255. 255.255.255.255. Then we subtract 1, and we get 254 on the end for the last octet. Then we subtract 2, and we get 252. We subtract 4, and we get 248. We subtract 8, and we get 240. We subtract 16, we get 224. We subtract 32, we get 192. We subtract 64, we get 128. We subtract 128, we get 0. Once we hit 0, it gets a bit more complicated, but basically we start over again at 1. So 255 minus 1 equals 254. 254 minus 2 equals 252. 252 minus 4 equals 248. 248 minus 8 equals 240. 240 minus 16 equals 224. 224 minus 32 equals 192. 192 minus 64 equals 128. And 128 minus 128 is 0. And now we're back at 1 again. 255 minus 1 is 254. 254 minus 2 is 252. And so on until we get to 0.0.0.0 with a 0 cidr. And of course, notice the size of our IPs now has increased dramatically. Another thing you can look at when you have just the 255s is that they're going to equal multiples of 8. So that's a way to check your math as you go down the chart. Because notice we have 4 octets of 255. 4 times 8 is 32. Here we have 3 octets of 255. And 3 times 8 is 24. Here we have 2 octets of 255. And 2 times 8 is 16. And here's 1 octet of 255. And 1 times 8 is 8. So how might this help us on an exam? If we can remember the patterns and just remember this first row, 255.255.255.255, 32, 1, and 1. Then what we can do is when we sit down for the exam, while we're reading the instructions, we can start drawing out this table. Next, we write our cidr prefix, 32. Then total IPs, 1. And then usable IPs, 1. And then we know we subtract 1 every time in this column. So then we'll be at 31. And then if you can remember, we double on this row. First we start at 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. And we could keep going, but hopefully the question that we get on the exam will fall somewhere up here. So we don't have to do the entire table, but it just depends on what your questions are. Let's draw some lines in here so we keep everything together. Remember, our usable IPs are over here. We subtract 2. So 2 minus 2 is 0. 4 minus 2 is 2. 8 minus 2 is 6. 16 minus 2 is 14. (1024) minus 2 is 1022, and so on. Now this last part here is a little more difficult. Just 255.255.255.255. Next would be 255.255.255, and then for the last octet, we subtract 1. So that's 254. Next is 255.255.255. This time we subtract 2. So that's 252. Next is 255.255.255. Next we subtract 4, 248. Next is 255.255.255 minus 8 is 240. Next is 255.255.255, and 240 minus 16 is 224. Next is 255.255.255. 224 minus 32 equals 192. 255.255.255, and 192 minus 64 equals 128. 255.255.255. 128 minus 128 is 0. And here's where we can check our math. When we get to this point, we should be at a multiple of 8, and we are. If we don't get to a multiple of 8 at this point, as we're doing the chart, then we may have missed a step somewhere or missed some math somewhere. And then we just continue on.